Here we go. I think we're live. Well, good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, depending upon where you are. This is Patrick Millikin from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And I'm really excited to have with me this afternoon Daniel Weizmann. He's going to be talking about his brand new book, Cinnamon Girl, which is really terrific. So welcome, Daniel. It's great to see you.
It's great to be here.
Yeah. We had a real fun visit for the first book in the series, which came out last year, called The Last Songbird. And I really love what you're doing with these books. I mean, they're in many ways they're very classic Los Angeles crime novels. I mean, you know, you really capture the bizarre surreality of LA. You think of Chandler and Ross McDonald and so many other people. But then, weaving in, which is just to my taste, this fascinating and obscure kind of musical history that is such a big part of that landscape. So yeah, great to have you here. Um, let's, we were getting into a little bit of the weeds before I went live here, talking
Yeah.
about some of our favorite stuff. Um, this particular novel, well, first of all, before we get into this book, let's talk a little bit about, can you sort of introduce viewers who might not be familiar with you yet, about the series that you're doing and kind of a brief pitch?
Yeah. The Pacific Coast Highway Mystery Series follows a failed songwriter who's driving Lyft for a living. His name is Adam Zantz. And so he's kind of been on the outskirts of the music biz his whole life. He's obsessed with lyrics, you know. He's not like a very talented songwriter in any way, but he's also no musician at all. So he's obsessed with lyrics, and songs come to him as they do for so many of us, probably one in three people, you know. Songs come into his head out of the blue, whether it's like, songs that he loves, or sometimes it's like rewriting the lyrics of songs that he loves to match the current moment, you know. So his jukebox id is always firing up. And as abstract as that sounds, he uses that in his deduction because it's a line into his feelings about things and it helps him connect the dots with all these clues. So that's Adam Zantz, Lyft driver, failed songwriter, and crime solver. Unwitting crime solver, but in this second book, he's starting to actually take courses in investigation because he's fine. In the first book, he just completely fell into this crime and he had to solve it. In the second book, he's actually trying to groom himself to become a legit investigator. But the normal methods of data mining and stuff are too dry for him.
Hmm.
So that's kind of a tension in the second book.
Well, yeah, we get this a little taste of, okay, I could see where he might go next. He's sort of expanding his palette.
Yeah,
And, yeah, and that's, I think, with PI, modern day PI novels. I mentioned the classic Chandler and Hammett and Ross McDonald kind of era of that genre. That modern day PIs are not, going out boots on the ground and doing the, as much. A lot of it's, as you say, it's in front of the computer
right,
now, and a lot of it can be found on criminals, on Facebook, and social
right.
media and all that kind of thing.
One of the things that I'm trying to do with him is have a guy who, because as you're describing, modern day PIs in real life are data miners, and you're seeing less and less of them, I think, in crime fiction. But what you are seeing a lot of is police procedurals and police detectives. Okay. And they're great. And they're some of my very favorites, like Ed McBain and, Michael Connelly. I love those guys.
Sure.
I also like Lee Goldberg a lot. But I wanted a guy who doesn't have the right to grill somebody. So he's unassuming, he's kind of wimpy, and he just sort of meets you and he talks to you, but there's something sensitive about him, and people tend to open up for him because he's disarmingly not interrogating them.
He's not the jaded PI who, he's world weary in a sense, but you're right. He has this somewhat, there's a hapless quality about him that people respond to, especially women, you know.
Right. Like he's sort of like, it's like he's so unthreatening that actually, who said this about themselves once is Joan Didion. She said that she was so small that people just tended to trust her and open up to her, not realizing that she was going to use the information they gave her. I wasn't thinking of Joan Didion, but it's that same kind of thing where it's like, we've all met people that we open up to, and later we say, like, oh my God, I just told that person my whole life story.
Hmm.
There was just something about them that made me feel safe enough to do that.
Some people have that quality of being able to draw people out without, at the same time revealing very little about themselves. I've noticed some people that I know that have that vibe, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, so okay, so with the music connection, um, let's do a little recap about the first book and what was the music angle in that story.
So he's a Lyft driver who picked up Annie Linden, who is a once famous, not really a has-been, but she's not really active anymore, kind of kind of a Stevie Nicks, Joni Mitchell figure. And they bond. He becomes her regular driver. And um, and then she gets murdered. And he takes it upon himself to try and find out who did it.
Right,
So, Annie Linden is somebody from somebody who grew up in the heart of the golden era of LA's rock scene. In 65, she's playing at the Gas House, which is like, it was like an old beatnik coffee shop. Um, she goes to Wallach's Music City, which was the record store in the heyday of LA, and it's not there anymore, you know. Um,
would
this
she
book,
would she have gone to Ciro's and places like that where the
absolutely, yeah. I mean,
birds
probably when
birds
she
were
was
playing?
very young, when she was a teenager, before she herself started performing. And then, she probably came up through the troubadour and all that, right? So in this book, it's a whole different ball game. It's kids that were, well, it's the Paisley Underground. And the Paisley Underground were kids who grew up listening to the Beatles, but right when they were in junior high or high school, Lennon was killed, and that 60s utopia was no more. So the Paisley Underground was like this kind of brief but really intense culty attempt to like recapture that golden age that Annie Linden actually saw firsthand.
Right. And also, because this, when I love the music of the Paisley Underground that you're talking about. There was a certain amount of kitsch to it, and it was also when, for one thing, when do you think it started? Like 1980, 81, something like that?
Well, it's like that's a complicated
79, maybe.
question because it's like in some ways the retro impulse started long before that. I mean,
Yeah,
first you had people in the 70s messing with 30s and 40s iconography and stuff, right?
sure.
You also started to have this weird thing in the 70s of genuine rockabilly revival. You had Sha Na
Right.
Na, and you had, you know, um, Rock On. I can't remember who sings that song. Suddenly the myth of rock music, like American Graffiti, was being treated as a myth. It wasn't happening
Mhm.
in real time. It was rock and roll people were starting to look back, okay? And I think punk rock was a branch off of that. Punk rock was a started as a back to basics kind of thing.
Right.
Or as my friend Gene Scalati put it, it was the corpse of rock and roll getting a defibrillator. You know, so by the time the Paisley Underground started, the B-52s they're not of the Paisley Underground. They're several years before, but the Cramps, I mean, I think of all those groups as being very attached to the past.
Right. Absolutely. And then you think about, yeah, I was going to say the Paisley Underground was clearly informed by the whole punk movement. Uh, would it have would it have developed the way it did without punk rock? It's hard to say, you
I
know?
don't think so because I mean a lot of those people were
Yeah,
in the audience, and I mean they played faster, they played harder,
sure.
very often played on the same bill, you know.
Yeah, and then, before that, just a few years before the Sex Pistols, of course, were the MC5 and the Stooges, and that was clearly the same, sort of punk before punk, really. Uh,
Yeah, but it's funny, like Iggy from the Stooges worshiped the Seeds,
mm,
and the Seeds are I think like really one of the three or four primary gospels of the Paisley Underground. The
Guy
Seeds, the
Saxon.
Birds, yeah. So anyway,
Yeah. And so, and also, there were the popularity of, mining through the past and finding all these gems of like mostly one-hit wonders, but not all, of sort of forgotten garage rock from the 60s. Um, and like Pebbles, those compilations.
yeah, those records were coming out, and it was like such an incredible time for discovery. And I don't think this is true anymore, but in those days, you would walk into the Salvation Army and you would see the most incredible stuff from the 60s. It wasn't even treated like it had any value. These incredible Nehrus and all the old records you could buy them for 10 cents a piece. So that's why, that's the great joke of the Salvation Army, the band Salvation Army.
Yep.
You know, it's they are like that experience.
So for people watching, who would be some of the examples of Paisley Underground bands that were kind of entered the public consciousness? I know there were tons that never really made it, but like the group in your book, which we'll talk about.
Yeah. Well, I have a playlist on Spotify which you can get to from my website, but also the 3 o'clock who started as Salvation Army, the Dream Syndicate, the Bangles who started as the Bangs, uh, Rain Parade, Green on Red, and then there was like I mean, the Unclaimed and the Unknowns who had kind of a surfy thing going.
Red
I
Cross.
think that all that stuff was more connected than people usually acknowledge. Like there was a mod revival going on, and those kids were the kids in the audience at those Paisley Underground shows frequently. And there were clubs like the Bullet Club and the On Club where it was like a mix of all of it. So it was just this big wave of revival, but punkified, like you're saying.
It's funny. My uncle was played guitar in garage rock bands in the 60s. And yeah, he was like one of the first, or he was when I was growing up. I mean, we're still tight. We still get together and play guitar and stuff. But he was in this band who, those kitschy movies of the 60s that really didn't have any script or anything. It was just like these random patchworks of the young people going crazy.
I worship
Like
those movies.
there'd be like this the surfing scene, and then they'd cut
Yeah.
to like them riding on the motorcycles. And but anyway, my uncle's group, this is like 66, 67, and he was like 15, 16 years old, is in this movie called Mondo Mod.
I
um
think I've heard of it. I know Mondo Hollywood, and I think it's part of that same series.
yeah, so his band, they got some just priceless footage of these 16, 17-year-old kids. Uh, you know, anyway, not to go off on that tangent, but
No, no, I
I
want to see
I
that.
bring it up because the group in your book, and yeah, why don't we get into talk about what kind of starts the story off? And as I said, it's a very complicated and labyrinthine sort of plot, which is really, really great.
Well, I mean, my idea for it all started with the idea that a test pressing of a record that didn't come out could be a clue. You know, I love test pressings. I love demos and bootlegs. I'm just a total record geek, you know. Um, and I also am fascinated by any kind of work of art that doesn't come out, you know.
Right.
So this is a test pressing of a Paisley Underground band. And I don't want to do any spoilers, but it ends up being connected to a cold case murder. And so as Adam Zantz, this Lyft driver, is trying to explore what the murder could have been all about, he has to find out about this band. And so he just like kind of goes down the rabbit hole into the history of this garage band, right?
Right.
And that never really made it out of the garage, and they were high school kids. Um, so yeah,
But what he originally is investigating, um, his gosh, let me get the name right. Yeah, Emil
yeah.
El Kaim. Can you pronounce that?
Emil El Kaim.
El Kaim.
Yeah,
Um, so way back, in 1984, he was arrested for the killing of this other guy, um, and his father, correct? I hope I'm not getting this.
yeah,
Hires
yeah,
Adam. Yeah,
yeah. His father is dying, is 90, has pancreatic cancer, and receives a visit from some random person that is about what his son's age was, saying, "I can prove that your son was innocent." His son got his Charles El Qaim's son Emil El Qaim was killed in prison. So this guy named Holly comes to the nursing home and says, "I can prove your son was innocent." That's all he says. And then he kind of says, "I'm going to come back with more stuff," but he disappears. So because Charles El Qaim is dying, he's frantic to find out exactly how his son can be exonerated, even though his son was killed in prison. It's just more, he just needs it more for his peace of mind. So Adam is a family friend and he takes it on thinking, I'm humoring the old man. There's no way, there's no way in the time that he's going to be alive, I'm going to be able to figure out who really killed the person that they say Emil El Qaim killed.
right.
This supposed drug dealer named Reynaldo Durazo. Okay. But as he starts to dig things up, he turns up this test pressing. And this is the one spoiler I guess I'll have to give away for it to make any sense. He soon ends up learning that Emil and the guy that Emil allegedly killed, Ray Durazo, and the guy who visited Charles El Qaim in the nursing home, Holly, were all in a band together in high
Right.
school. So all of a sudden, it's like, wait a minute, these guys are not strangers. They're even more than friends. They were bonded like a family in this mission. So
And then yeah, and then we learn kind of a little bit more about each of the members, and that they're fascinating, all of them. Um, the it was the drum or no, the lead singer, Mickey Sandos slash Sanderson, who we learn about him. I really love that character. I mean, his whole arc, and as I say, all of them, really interesting. Uh,
I was in bands a little bit in high school and in my 20s too. And bands are um, bands are an incredible thing because they're a pseudo family, you know, And I think that band, I mean, I won't say this about every band, but I think that, or everybody in every band, but I think bands frequently attract people who need that sense of family. I mean, maybe everybody needs that sense of family, but it attracts the young who aren't for whatever reason, their own families, they don't either don't feel tethered to their own family, or maybe there's problems, whatever it is, they gravitate toward this pseudo family.
And
So,
it is kind of the last gang in town sort of thing, you
and the
know.
other thing too is, that with the shared mission, there's a desire to conquer, you know,
Shared ambition, yeah.
a shared ambition. And then there's also, especially I think for people that join bands at that age, there's a desire to hang on to some innocence precisely at the moment where you're not going to be able to,
Yeah.
and so that was kind of what I wanted to show with their history is like, they start out in high school and they're really well intentioned, and they're rinky dink, I mean, they're just playing in a garage. They're just, like, I don't know if your uncle's like, maybe your uncle's first band was probably like this. I'm sure he got more sophisticated as he went on, but they're rinky dink. But then all of a sudden they're starting to get a little bit good, and then people start to get interested in them. And then they improve even more, but then the issues start to show up. It can't stay innocent. You can't stay in the garage forever, just like you can't stay home forever, right?
Well, yeah, and it's just the story of so many, so many group, having a group artistic endeavor is something that's, it's rife for drama from the very beginning. Unlike being a painter or a writer where you're in charge of the entire thing yourself, once you get into a band setting, you know, fairly quickly one or two members kind of assert themselves as the dominant force. Whoever writes the songs, and so all of a sudden, oh yeah, our drummer kind of he's not as good as that kind of thing.
And then there's
Egos.
management, and that's the title character. She's not their manager, there's no contract, but she's their de facto manager. She's the one who gets them the gigs and tells them what to do.
Right.
So, and she's
Her,
also in high school with them. So, but
her
yes,
mom's a her mom's a piece of work too, isn't she?
yeah,
Which we can't get into too much, but yeah, I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but
her mom was probably in the audience of the shoot of your uncle's Mondo Mod movie.
probably was. Yeah, definitely. Um, and there's so much fun stuff in the book. As I said at the beginning, this is a classic LA novel. Um, and there's so much weird, interesting history of LA. It's a city that, as is constantly like the ghosts of LA's past are coming up through the sidewalk all the time. When I go out there, I just you see glimpses of the 20s and 30s popping up. Um, I'm not articulating myself very well here, but a year ago when we talked, I had been to see this reunion show for the compilation Nuggets, and
Oh, you went to that show.
I went to that show. My
Yeah.
wife and I went out in Glendale, and
Yeah.
uh, and Lenny Kaye and Peter Buck from REM, Susanna Hoffs was there. Wayne Kramer, may he rest in peace, was there. Um, but as interesting as that was, seeing all the weirdos who came out of the woodwork, all these characters. Um, and I love the character in the book, the Larry Laserbeam character. He just kind of reminds me of one of these guys.
Yeah. He and his wife for sure would have been at that Alex Theater
Right,
Nuggets
exactly.
show for sure, without a doubt.
Right.
Yeah.
So as a music journalist, we haven't really talked about that too much. You've done quite a bit of music writing. When this is obviously a very personal book. it falls into line with a lot of the period that you were writing about, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, can you talk a little bit about that background?
Well, I started as a punk journalist, and in those days, a lot of stuff happened by the U.S. mail. Actually, even before being a punk journalist, I collected old time detective radio shows by the U.S. mail. You'd trade them, through the Spurdvac newsletter, right? So I was kind of used to that weird way of communicating, even as a kid. But then I put out my own punk fanzine, and um,
What was
people
it
would.
called?
It was called Rag and Chains.
Okay.
And then after 5 issues, I went on to write for Flipside. So right in the throes of all of that, one of the people that I used to trade tapes with sent me a tape of Salvation Army. And I knew that it was going to come out on Frontier Records, which was already the one of the three big record companies that we respected. I mean, there were no
Circle
duds.
jerks and
Yeah, Lisa Fancher's record company. It was Circle Jerks. It was TSOL. Every one of those records were like, the most important thing to us back then, right? I'm talking 13, 14 years old.
sure.
And so I had this cassette of Salvation Army. Um, and from that moment, my whole orientation changed because it was a combo of like everything that I loved, like in one thing. It was punk, but it was also the psychedelic music that my older brother had turned me on to, like Love, and the Beatles. Like for us, we were the kids that were pushed on swings to, Revolver or whatever, right?
Hmm.
Um, but it also had this urban noir quality that you see in punk, in a way that you don't see with a lot of psychedelia or all the psychedelia from the 60s. You do see it in Love and the Doors, but
Yeah, right. The dark side of
the
that.
dark side of LA,
Yep.
but I mean a band like the Dream Syndicate, I think that was probably the next record in the chain that came along, that
Days of
that is
Wine
like
and
a great
Roses.
noir novel to me. I mean,
Yeah.
start to finish,
Yeah.
Um, it just changed everything because it was like it showed you that punk was getting narrower and narrower, and they were doing the exact opposite. They were blowing it
Sure.
out, you know?
Yeah, with that whole, I kind of, some of those records you mentioned, like the TSOL, Dance with Me, and that first Bad Religion record was big for me.
Yeah.
Uh, some of those early ones. There was such an interesting mix of in LA at that time. Uh, you know, you'd see on the same bill like X, Los Lobos, Saccharine Trust,
Yeah.
um, whomever. I mean, there's just this why, and they were all very different from each other.
Yeah. It was kind of like nobody had figured out the parameters with which to push everybody into. And that were just really exciting. I love that.
And then the whole
Um,
hardcore thing lost me because it became way too regimented and, you know,
yeah.
dress code rules, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it was also for me, I was a very small, wimpy kid, and it was getting progressively more football like.
Right. Absolutely.
So it was fast becoming the thing I had sought to avoid in the first place. So it was like, these Paisley Underground people were more cerebral a little bit too, and a little more poetic.
I,
Um,
I remember in some of the magazines, maybe there were articles that you'd written where like, because I would look at Flipside and what was the other one, Maximum Rock and Roll, and some of those magazines, and there would start to be this little like they'd give it a little bit of space, like a Paisley
yeah,
Underground piece. Like
yeah,
you'd see a Salvation Army picture or like Red Cross or
yeah.
somebody like that. And I remember seeing the one that really hit it big eventually, that the people that are watching, I know we're boring everybody to tears with all this minutia, but it's fun. Um, the group that really broke out of that whole period and became popular was the Bangles, and they started as the Bangs, right?
Yeah,
And their whole aesthetic was, Rickenbackers, and
they were so great.
they were cool.
They were so great. And I was a huge Go-Go's fan before then, and I think the Go-Go's were kind of Paisley Underground too. I mean, they were the
Yeah.
Go-Go's. But the Bangles were their own thing. They were more folk and they had harmonies and they were sentimental. Whereas the Go-Go's were, I always thought of them as kind of like Busby Berkeley girls. They're like very
Mm.
urban and tough chicks. So
Jane Weedland has more of the Paisley Underground vibe,
maybe, yeah.
perhaps. Yeah. So it's interesting in making the connection between some of this music and noir, and how that permeates LA. And you're so right. I didn't really consciously think about it, but they really do cross paths perfectly, you
I,
know.
I think Arthur Lee and Love is the first noir rock music act
Interesting.
because they are pessimistic, anti-utopian, um,
Interracial, which was very subversive at the time.
interracial. In their songs, I hear this message that nowhere is safe and nothing is what it seems. You can't really trust any of this tinsel, right? So that was just incredible. I mean, I think that I still think of them as the best rock group in a way, because they put that in there. And then the Doors, I don't know if the Doors took that, but the Doors are another beautiful noir expression,
Oh yeah.
without a doubt. I mean, even their first album cover was a conscious attempt to look like one of those noir movie posters.
Hmm. For sure.
So yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I met a little girl in a Hollywood bungalow.
yeah,
Their songs were very,
yeah,
uh, yeah, it's like, Ross McDonald in a song with some menace, just very atmospheric.
yeah. And there's people, still working noir in music today, like Lana Del Rey. I don't know about her latest records, but Ultraviolence, West Coast, those are little noir masterpieces.
So with you, as far as, let's talk about books a little bit, what were some of were you always a fan of detective fiction, or was that something that you discovered at some point and just,
Well, I started with old time detective radio when I was like 8 or 9.
right,
My dad was really into the bogey movies, and I think that was the first thing that set me off. But I got into Dragnet radio shows and The Saint. Actually, there's a wonderful podcast called Great Detectives of Old Time Radio that you can find on wherever you find podcasts. And they replay a lot of those. I'm just I listen to them while I commute sometimes. But so, it was natural to go from that to reading Raymond Chandler in high school, Ross McDonald. I mean, some of those Chandler books were so amazing that I can tell you what bus bench I was sitting on when I was reading a certain page, because you just
really?
reading and you're saying, this is incredible. He's talking about the city I live in. It's not literature like, this foreign thing. I think he's kind of like the first poet of LA, or maybe he's the poet of LA. But anyway, so yeah, I got hooked on those and from there.
When did you start your first attempts at writing fiction?
Uh, Probably, oh, I mean, really messy attempts as early as 9 and 10.
Oh, really?
And I had this funny experience where one of my sisters was friends with the Pulitzer Prize winning playwright Miguel Pinheiro,
Really?
who wrote Short Eyes. And when I was 10, he came over and read some of it. He was like, this guy's brilliant. He's a real writer, you know? And I mean, I don't know if it was junk, but you know, it certainly boosted my ego, right?
Right.
But by 15, when I was already a rock journalist, I really was in earnest trying to write mysteries. And I still have some of the attempts, you know, and they were very cliche, hard-boiled, you know, the thinnest possible version of a Chandler book, you know. It took me a long time. I kept trying it. 26, I tried at 27, 37, 42, you know. I got trunk manuscripts for days. But
Big.
I had a kind of breakthrough, I would say right around 37, which is already a long time ago. But I found my voice a little bit more, or let's put it this way. I went from, I stopped trying to be hard boiled and I started being the soft boiled person that I really am, you know, like a little more porous and a little more emotional. So, uh, when I was finally able to get that into a detective form, then I knew I could finish a draft.
So was the last Songbird, your first published novel? Have you,
Yes.
yeah,
Mhm.
okay. And how long did that take you to write?
So many rewrites. I mean, probably 18, 20 drafts. And it did not come out until I was 54. So I'm a fantastic lesson in never giving up, you know. And I went through different editors and you know, I had to learn a lot about what, you know, just what doesn't work. So I'm still learning. I'm still learning every day.
Yeah, your publisher, Melville House, I really respect them and what they do. You know, they're really a great place.
Yeah,
Uh,
they're so cool.
yeah,
They're just, you know, they've given me the red carpet treatment and they that my editor there, Carl Bromley, honestly, in his first letters to me, I felt like he knew what I was trying to do even more than I knew myself, you know.
interesting. Yeah.
And when you find that, you know you're in luck.
How did you know, I've said like three times that this is a complicated story, and it is. When I was reading it, I was thinking, wow, it'd be fun to be kind of to like see how you and your editor went through the book. You know, in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I wonder what how big of a role did the editor play with this second book?
Well, first, my magnificent agent Janet Oshiro and I worked on it a lot. I mean, a lot. Huge elements were just totally removed. But even
Really
before I showed it to her, I mean, you wouldn't believe how much it changed from its initial thing. You know, it's actually writing a mystery is a really crazy process. And I bet everybody who writes mysteries has their own thing, but my process is really nuts. I every day I after a day of writing, I make a list, you know, just a simple list. I try to give each chapter or scene a name so that I don't have to like write a whole description of it. And I make the list and I just meditate on the chain of events, you know, and that alone is like, you know, you can get so confused and just say, but why would this happen before that? And if is he going to find this? And, you know, it's like you want it to be credible, you want it to feel real, you know. And as Dennis from Melville House, the man who founded Melville House with his wife, uh, said, it's like a game of three card Monte to write a mystery. You know, you're constantly telling the reader to look over there. No, look over there. You know, no, not over there. You know, and so it it should feel at the end that it should feel even if you guessed who did it, you still should have a sense of surprise about the why of it. You know.
right. Well, and all the very fascinating little alleys that you take us down on the side, you know. One of the things I'm glad I remembered this. Um, I wanted to ask you about the whole miniaturism thing. Hawley, this character, he designs these miniature sets for movies, and he has this kind of, it's like a passion project, right? Of designing period miniature replicas of the of Los Angeles at certain points.
Yeah.
How did you work that into the story? I mean, it's fascinating.
Well, I love miniatures myself, you know. Um, there's a ride in Disneyland called Storybook Canals where you go through the mouth of a whale. It's a really gentle little kiddie ride in Fantasyland. It's not a fast ride at all. And all you do is you float around on this river by all these miniature little villages. You remember that?
No,
Oh, okay. Well,
no.
check it out on YouTube. I think it's one of the most beautiful things ever created. And miniaturism is a weird impulse, right? You know, and the Paisley Underground also was a weird impulse. They're both an attempt to have a relationship with something that isn't quite there,
Mm,
you know? And I saw in this Holly guy somebody who was so nostalgic that he was nostalgic to an obsessive compulsive degree, let's say. And I think I'm not saying we're obsessive compulsive, but I think a lot of us these days have a real struggle with nostalgia because the internet is this machine that is just cranking out the 20th century at us for as long as we want to gobble it. You can just have 20th century candies all day long, you know? Um, and that I think that's very dangerous. So I both have the disease and I think it's dangerous. Let's put it that way.
yeah, that's really interesting. Let me just turn off my camera and turn it back on. I seem to be like disappearing into the mists here. I don't know why. Here we go. Which is probably better that way, actually, Daniel. Maybe I should just be off screen here.
No, no, come back.
I don't think that did much, but yeah, I don't know what's going on here. But um, yeah, what you're talking about really resonates because thinking about when we were kids and during this era, there was so much there was so much romance to some of these bands. You wouldn't see them on YouTube. You couldn't just plug up YouTube and see what they look like, see what they
Yeah.
sounded like, and with the records, there was always like the hunt to try to find the cool record store that would have this stuff.
Mhm.
So you felt, and that plays into the whole gang sort of, finding a community that's sort of out of the mainstream. Um, and records and the whole culture of records. And you get into some wonderful stuff in this book about the run out grooves and the little messages that are written in
Yeah.
run out grooves. And um, when everything as it is today, and I talked about this a lot with people, when everything is available 24/7, instant gratification, not only does it seems to change the way our brains work, but it's like it almost diminishes everything, you know, if you can have instant access to everything.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's also like, earlier I was talking about how the test pressing or the bootleg or the unreleased thing has this kind of glow to it. I
sure.
think that ties in with what you're saying. It's
Yes.
like um here's like a really weird example actually. I have aunts and people that are very dear to me that for whatever reason died before the internet took hold. And these are people that are my memories of them are so vivid and so important, you know?
Yeah.
And you Google their names and you're not going to find anything. It's like they never happened, you know? But I know they happened. And that is that is a, I don't know why, but that's a great source of what's the right word? It's a great source of like well, frustration for sure to me, but it's more than that. It's like it's a sense of like what's here in this box, okay, is not correlating with my experience of reality. And
Hmm.
it makes me distrust it. So well, I don't know how I got into this, but the missing, the test pressing is proof. It happened. They happened. The photograph that has not been placed online that you look at and you say, it happened, you know.
Right.
Um, those things count. That's what I'm saying. Those things count.
Definitely. Yeah. Um, we have some really some nice comments and questions from people that are watching who've gone deep into the weeds with us here. Uh,
I
let's,
didn't even know we had that. Can I see them?
I don't, I'm streaming this on Facebook and on YouTube, so we have people watching.
Well, I'll look them up later.
Yeah, but I'll read some of these questions. Let's see. Your book has a beautiful cover. Yes, it does. Both of them
It's
do.
it's an incredible
What
cover.
a
The
great
the
approach.
artist that I don't want to mispronounce her name, but she's just wonderful. Her credit is in the book, and with both books, the covers came back. Because you do sort of imagine your cover,
Hmm.
while you're working on something, and then it just came back so much better than I ever could have imagined it. And there's funky little details about this cover too that I just want to point out. You know, she's looking over her shoulder into the past.
Sorry, I'm looking at the cover.
Oh yeah, mine's backwards. Yeah, and she's looking over her shoulder into the past, which is exactly what the theme of the book is. And behind her is sunlight. But when
This
I
is the galley. Is this exactly the same as the finished copy?
it's just a slightly better color correction, but it's the same color, it's the same picture.
Okay.
Behind her is sunlight, and anyway, I don't want to read too much into it, but when I first saw it, I thought that there was like a hidden face in there, you know,
Like right in here.
a little bit lower. Yeah. I mean, not
Okay.
really. It was like it was a mistake. I was wrong, but there's something about the way the shadows play. So it's about, like I was saying, it's about what's missing. So
It
yeah, I
is.
totally agree. It's an awesome cover.
It's an interesting image. It really is. It's there is an element of mystery to her face and the way, as you say, the way she's turned.
Plus, needless to say, they just picked somebody who really looked like she could have been from that era.
Yeah. Yeah, you get that sense of, sort of that transition, the end of innocence. Um, maybe. I don't know. And I like the font on both. I think it's a
Yeah.
great font. So thumbs up, Melville House. Uh, and no, I didn't get paid for saying that. Let's see. Yeah, one of our good friends from Italy, Stefania, she says, I have a question. Music has an important role. Oh, sorry, I just lost it. Music has an important role in your book. Does music influence your writing? Is it an inspiration? You've addressed that a little bit, but do you listen to music while writing?
Yeah, definitely. I have two ways that music works for me in trying to create a story. The first one, which I think is not uncommon, is I put instrumental music on. And it has to be two things at once. It has to be very gentle because I can't concentrate on the writing, but I also like it when it's up tempo. So exotica music like Martin Denny, Les Baxter, Nino Rota, who's from Italy, that kind of music, Miles Davis in a silent way, I like upbeat but quiet, right? That's one thing. And then the second thing is, as I come to drafting a full chapter, I try to find a song or a song lyric that perfectly matches that chapter. And I'm always building a playlist while I'm writing, and it changes a lot. As the scenes get shuffled around, songs got to go. This one doesn't work anymore. Oh, what about that? And when I know the song is like really capturing that feeling for me, then I know I'm getting somewhere with the chapter. Like in this book, there's a scene where he and Mickey Sandoz B&E, they break into somebody's house, and I struggled with that scene. I wrote it this way, I wrote it that way. And then when I picked the song, which is Voices Green and Purple by the Bees, um, I was like, that's it. That's the energy I want in the song, in the chapter. So hopefully that answers it.
That's so cool. Um, let's see, Stefania. Yeah, music and books are my biggest passions. I'm a singer too. I think that both of those things can take us into a magic world. Yes, indeed. Yeah, she's a very talented singer. I've seen some of her stuff on
Awesome.
the interwebs. Um, let's see here. Oh, here. Yeah, Scott says it feels like the soundtrack would be a very important aspect of any film or TV adaptation. Would you want to see, or perhaps I should say hear, original songs or existing tunes or a mix? Thoughts?
Uh, both my books have playlists that are on the website with existing songs. But if somebody were to adapt them, then it would be their issue. They could do whatever they want with it. They wouldn't have to use my songs. But for me, those playlists match the chapters.
Gotcha. Let's see. Okay. Where are we? Okay, yeah. Renee asks, Daniel, are you writing full time now?
Well, I've always been writing full time. It's not always working on the project that I want to work on most, but I do a lot of nonfiction and editing and stuff like that as well. But
Right.
I am working on a third Zant story and having a lot of fun with it. It's actually weird to be releasing a book, but working on another one. Um, it's sort of like, I'm like, I think of myself like a garment industry guy who like, it's the middle of summer and I'm like worried about, Christmas sweaters or something.
Well, now you have to tell us a little bit. So, can you give us any information about the third book or
Well, it's I will say it's a whole different genre. That's all I'll say.
really?
Yeah, it's not Paisley Underground. No, it's not a whole different genre for a book. It's a mystery with Adam Zantz, but it's
Okay.
it's a whole different music genre.
Oh, do tell. No,
Yeah.
not yet. No,
Not yet.
but it's part of LA history.
Yeah.
Okay, very cool. Um, let's see. Yeah, Robin says, do you have a playlist available for us to find? Can they get to, yeah, you mentioned you had there are two different Spotify playlists, one for each
Yeah,
book.
they're both on danielweitzman.com in the news section. They're like two blog entries, this playlist and that playlist.
Right. Very cool. Um, yeah, before we wrap it up, I know we're getting to be out of time. Thanks everybody for questions and for tuning in. Um, yeah, I forget who it is. Forgive me, people, but somebody asked, do you play any instruments yourself?
I mean, really bad. I took music theory and I know how to do chords on a piano, but I couldn't play a song on a piano. I couldn't jam with a band or anything like that. Um, yeah, I've always wished that I was fluent in a on a musical instrument, and I think that the people that are have just the greatest gift in the world. Just to be able to play for yourself, it seems so relaxing.
Yeah. I play guitar badly, you know,
Yeah,
but I have fun, fun doing it.
yeah.
And
Lead as well as rhythm, or
a little bit of both, yeah. Um, I just plonk around on the thing.
yeah,
And every once in a while I'll get a notion to all right, I'm gonna learn, you hear musicians talk about that point where it clicks and all of a sudden, in my case, the fretboard, but someone would say the keyboard, it all opens up to them. And I've yet to have that moment.
Yeah.
I mean, I can goof around and play scales and chords and stuff like that, and do the same tired blues licks I always play, but
With others or just on your own?
usually just on my own.
Yeah.
Although I have played with other people, but no, I'm just a bedroom basher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw on Facebook a couple months back, Jeff McDonald from one of my favorite bands, Red Cross. He was posting from his notebook, these are the songs that I practiced this week. And it was like 150 different songs from every possible genre, not his own songs. There was like Bob Dylan, but then there was like some crazy country song, then there was like some weird pop hit from 1992 that, but just he as a matter of course sits down and just says, okay, I'm going to learn that song. I'm going to learn that song. And I just thought that must be so much fun.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, I had a thought, but it left. That's okay. Um, Red Cross. I don't know, that really takes me back. Yeah, I remember them when their first singles were coming out. And yeah.
Yeah, they're part of the inspiration for this book too. I mean, definitely a garage band with a great nostalgia.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Daniel, it's been great to talk with you this afternoon. Congratulations on the publication of the book.
Thank you so
Uh,
much for having me. It was great fun.
is Melville, here's my last question. We do get a hint about, possible expansion of the series. Is Melville going to let you keep the music angle, or are they going to try to make you go into a broader thing? Because I remember that happened, and maybe it was organically, it just his world grew. But Ace Atkins, he started off writing these really great uh, blues detective kind of,
Right.
and I
Right.
love those books, the Nick Travers books. But after a while, he said, after like three or four of them, he's like, I don't know how much more I can do with this.
I think that music can always play a part in it, but it doesn't necessarily have to be where the crime happens. It doesn't
Right.
it doesn't have to be, it could be. I've thought about it. It's a great question. I've thought about it myself, you know. Um, when somebody's as obsessed with music as Adam Zance is, then I think it's going to have some music in it.
It's
But look,
always
even
been,
even Bosch, Michael Connolly's Bosch, he's a jazz freak and
for
he's always
sure.
talking about which records he listens to. So,
Or,
yeah,
one of my favorite writers, George Pelecanos,
yeah,
he always has music in his books, in some way. But yeah, I'm excited for you. I think this is, as I say, a real classic LA crime series. And I need to get you out here. Be
yeah, I
fun
would love
getting
that.
out here in
I would love
person.
that. It's not that far. Actually, I have a great Arizona story, which maybe we can close on. I was traveling with a band that was not very sophisticated, but they had been booked into a show in Arizona during the part of the year where our time zones are not in sync.
Right.
And so they drove the whole way and
Oh
missed their
no.
show and weren't able to play their show. Yeah, so and when I told my dad that when I came home, he was just shaking his head like, What? Nobody looked that up?" Yeah.
Well, and then, I've already said I can ask the last question, but here's one more that's going to be the last. You mentioned your father, and that is some of the family stuff in these books informed by personal your
Oh
story.
yeah. I don't think I could write fiction that wasn't personal. I don't know that I'd have anything to say. It's just it's the engine. So yeah.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. And yeah, let's stay in touch, Daniel. I'd like
For
to.
sure.
Do you know Jim Ruland by chance?
I do. I love Jim Ruland. He's
Yeah, he's
terrific.
great. It would be awesome to have a like maybe put something together, like a little panel of writers who write about music and
I would
do
love that.
something like that. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, have a great night and thanks everybody once again.
Thanks,
And
everybody.